bit of a cold, so I might some coughing and sneezing sometimes. Rothschild's unknown collection. You would wonder why unknown. Why does this not work? Because I have to use that button. Because Rothschild himself is quite known. He's known for his large, very large scientific bird collection. He is probably known for his private natural history museum in Tring. This is Walter as a handsome young man and as a perhaps still handsome elderly man. This is how many people know him as an eccentric man driving to Tring with his zebras. This is his private museum from the outside. Walter was always interested in natural history. He was from a banker's family, like most Rothschilds. But as far as I know, he wasn't very good with money. He could spend it very well by buying specimens, but finally his younger brother went in the bank world and Walter could play with his specimens. This was his private collection, of his private museum then. I say private, public could go in there. It was a public museum as well. This is the house. Was it where we lived? I'm not quite sure. I look at Robert now. Was that where Walter lived himself, in this house? Yes. Next to Tring Park. In Tring Park he kept his rheas and his cassowaries and lots of other animals. Rothschild was very fond of his red-eyes. As I said, he had a large scientific collection of bird skins, and he had always promised that to the Natural History Museum in London. But unfortunately, in the early 1930s, he got financial trouble. He had to raise money fast for some dubious reason. He couldn't ask his family, so he offered his collection for sale. The Natural History Museum in London said, too expensive, thanks, but no thanks. Still thinking, when you die, we get it anyway. But then there was New York who said, oh yeah, we like your collection. And for $1 a skin, $300,000, 300,000 skins, the whole lot was sold to New York. This is a picture of the skins being packed to be transported to New York. That's why they are leaving. People who have been in Tring still recognize probably the entrance. It's a sad picture. All the boxes arrived in New York with about 300,000 skins. So nothing left. Not quite true. Rothschild kept all his mounted specimens and a handful of skins as well, mainly the extinct species. But after his death in 1937, his museum and the remaining collection was bequeathed to the Natural History Museum in London. And although we are still based in Tring, we are part of London. This is how the galleries look nowadays. Not much changed, in fact. That makes the museum so lovely, I think. In this corner here, it's my favorite cabinet. Because what most people don't know is that Rothschild had a particular interest in aberrant birds. Hybrids and also color aberrations. And he had a large collection. In that respect, he is, you can compare him with the founder of this museum, of the Darwin Museum, Alexander Kotz. They were in contact with each other as far as I know. But yeah, a huge interest in aberrant birds. So after his death, all those mounted specimens came to the Natural History Museum in London. And to be honest, my colleagues then were not really interested in this. It was all packed in a storage, and that was where it was. Because it didn't have any data, they say, and in a way they were correct. But when I started 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago in Tring, and I saw those specimens, many of you know my interest, aberrations in birds, so I was very excited and started working on the specimens. So I now show you a few highlights from specimens I found in his collection. But in the first instance, when you look at them, nice specimen, but not much information. But when you look further into it, then they have more information. And the specimens I will show you now are all specimens who are recorded in the literature, and even often pictured in literature. Let's start with this nice looking bird, a hybrid between a pheasant and a black grouse. The label says that it is bought at the Nichols sale, and lot number 50. John Bruce Nichols was an enthusiastic collector of British birds, and that's all we know. But he had a really big, large collection, as you can see, including a great auk, but also the collection include rarities, aberrations, and hybrids. That was why Rothschild was so interested to get specimens from this collection. And here you can see that lot 50, a female hybrid between a pheasant and a black game. See Zoologist, 1906, page 321. At least there is some reference to literature. And also, the label at the back says here black game with pheasant, female hybrid, presented by GBN, that's George Bruce Nichols, by the Reverend Jourdain. Also said something that it is shot by Corbett in Shropshire in 1874. We'll come back to that later. If you go to the Zoologist, then there is indeed a paper by Jourdain about the hybrids between black game and pheasants who have occurred in Great Britain. And if you then go to number 26, then it turned out that this bird, shot by Corbett in Shropshire in 1974, this is the bird that is described in that paper. And because Jourdain thought it was a female, and he only thought that, because it was grey around here, I can't be sure, I don't think it's a female because it's grey there, it's still juvenile plumage, but for that reason he thought it was advisable to give an illustration of this specimen because it was the only female known. This is the illustration, and this is the specimen. So this specimen, it gives a slight hint on the label that it was published somewhere, but that's all. But yeah, this specimen was a rather important specimen and important enough for the author to have it illustrated. Without any research into the specimen, we would never know. Another specimen, another hybrid, black grouse with hazel hen. The label Rothschild put on it doesn't say anything apart from that it is a hybrid. There is a label underneath what says that it was exhibited by Dresser at a meeting from the Zoological Society of London. If you then go to the proceedings, then indeed it's written that Dresser showed a bird, showing how rare it was, a hybrid between black grouse and hazel hen. And that's it. Dresser, by the way, was an English businessman and an ornithologist. Clearly lots of money, large collection. He exhibited the bird on behalf of John Fowler from London. But who John Fowler was, we don't know. You think, okay, nice specimen. Dresser said something about it in the proceedings, but that's not really impressive, is it? That's true. But thanks to Dresser, the bird was also brought to the attention of somebody else. And that somebody else was Adolf Bernhard Meyer, the director of the museum in Dresden, who wrote a rather impressive book in German, Unser Auer Rackel und Birkwild. Capercaillie, black grouse, and the hybrids between Capercaillie and black grouse, and close relations. In his book, when he comes to the Bastard zwischen Birk und Haselhuhn, the hybrid between black grouse and hazel hen, he says somewhere, can I find it? Yeah. Now first he mentioned that Dresser had already talked about a specimen in the proceedings of the Society of London of Natural History. Here, door die gute Vermittlung, I can hardly read it from this side, but he mentioned here that thanks to Dresser, he got his hands on a specimen to make an illustration. Now you can read it, if you can read German. This is the illustration. So, that particular specimen is used as illustration in Mayer's famous book about grouse. Rothschild finally got it because Dresser offered it to him when Fowler's family offered it to Dresser. Dresser didn't want it. He offered it to Rothschild, and Rothschild got it. But there is no mention on the label at all that this bird is used in this publication. It's only after looking into it and a bit of luck that I figured it out. Another hybrid, in this case black grouse, willow grouse. There is a label, not a Rothschild label, but a British Museum label, but says that it came originally, that it was from Rothschild, but that it came from the Sammlung Wiebke, the collection from the brothers Wiebke from Hamburg. This is a typical Wiebke label, Sammlung Wiebke, Hamburg. The Wiebke family, it started with the old Wiebke, who was a tradesman in fur and in leather. He had a huge collection. His sons, Anton and Paul, finally took over when he died. Very soon after the father died, Paul, who was the oldest son, got the business, but the business went bankrupt. He committed suicide. So poor Anton was left with a bankrupt company and a whole collection that was probably worth money, and it had lots of hybrids and collaborations. He offered it to Rothschild, or in fact he offered it to Hartet, that was Rothschild's curator. In the first instance they didn't want it, there was an auction, half of it was sold. They offered it again to Rothschild, Rothschild didn't want it. A second auction, but before the second auction really happened, Rothschild or Hartet turned up and bought all the remaining specimens. But the Sammlung Wiebke was rather important in German in his days. And in that same book from Meyer, when he talks about the hybrids between black grouse and willow grouse, and he says that for one of the pictures, as Hauptfigur, the most important specimen in that picture, he used a specimen from the Herren Wiebke, the gentleman, both gentlemen, the brothers Wiebke. And indeed, if you look at this specimen, you compare it with the specimen, this is the specimen but is used for this painting. Nowhere said on the label. I'm sure Rothschild knew, but he didn't put it on the specimen. So until quite recently, we didn't know that this specimen was used for any publication. Another hybrid, same hybrid, black grouse, willow grouse, but I like this one because he's from one of my famous taxidermist collectors, Lawrence. The largest Lawrence collection is in this museum, in the Darwin Museum. I'm quite jealous. This is the label, a typical Lawrence label with a handwriting what is difficult to decipher. But this is Lawrence's signature. I'm not quite sure how Rothschild got Lawrence specimens. This is, by the way, Theodore Lawrence, taxidermist in Moscow. Igor, you can see I changed it because you told me he was not related to the university, he had his own workshop. He was in contact with Rothschild before his death. Because here it says for the people who read German, sehr geehrter Herr Hartet. Hartet was Rothschild's curator, and he offered them all sorts of specimens, and this is 1904, I think, yes. And one of the things here, aufgestellt, mounted, Phasianus chrysomelas, female Hahnenvedrig. Now, Phasianus chrysomelas is an old name for the common pheasant, a female but in male plumage. It's this specimen. And I've just learned this week that this typical pedestal is an original Lawrence pedestal. And this is the label that goes with this specimen. Right, back to the hybrid black grouse, willow grouse. Lawrence wrote, in my opinion, a famous book about black grouse in Russia. It was published after his death, so I'm not quite sure how it all worked. but the book has beautiful pictures, photographs in some way, I think, and probably hand-colored of different specimens. You might recognize this specimen because there's this specimen. I don't know anything about techniques of producing pictures and how it was done, but all the specimens are mirroring. So I don't know if Rothschild got this specimen after Lawrence's death and after the book was published, but this specimen, and there are more, this specimen and this hybrid between a capercaillie and a black grouse, they're all in Rothschild's collection and they're all published in Lawrence's book. Again, how he got the specimens, I don't know. It's not mentioned on the labels, but the specimens have now even more scientific value, in my opinion, because we know they are used in those publications. Right, the last one, a beautiful kaka. It's the same specimen, right? It's not two specimens, it's the same specimen. The label says, fine variety of Nestor meridionalis, kaka, sold to me. And you think sold to me, was that Rothschild who wrote this? Turned out it was not Rothschild who wrote this. But it was sold to somebody as Nestor superbus. Also rather interesting that very tame and could talk. Okay, interesting, but who wrote this label? The only thing I had to go for was that it was clearly at an auction because it was lot number 182. After checking a few old sales catalogs, it turned out it was this sale from George Dawson Rowley, who already died, I think, in 1875. So, and this auction was in 1934. But it says clearly here, oh, this man even had two great auks, but also lots of birds from New Zealand, including kakas. And lot number 182 is a kaka parrot, variety superbus, white, tipped with scarlet and canary. Canary is probably yellow. No, I was wrong, he died in 1878. But Rowley, an English amateur ornithologist who published a lot, including a series called Ornithological Miscellaneous. This is the book. And when he talks about the kaka, he's talking about the example so well figured by Mr. Keulemans, who was an artist, appears one of the rarest varieties. Somewhere I said that it is superbus, yeah. I received it in 1974, directly from New Zealand, where it was in captivity, very tame with a considerable power of speech. This is the label again. No doubt it's the same specimen. I don't think there are many of those white specimens around who are very tame and could talk and belong to Rowley. So, another example of a specimen with a label, but no reference, no indication at all that it was ever published about or even pictured. This is the picture Keulemans made. So yeah, Rothschild's collection, unknown to many people, his aberrant birds. In my opinion, rather important. And everybody says, yes, of course, you like aberrations. But many of the specimens are published. Well, it was not known to us. And no doubt I will find more. But simple to show you that even if specimens don't have proper labels and information, there is far more you can find out about them if you have the time than you would think in first instance.